You're listening to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast, a place for sex addicts to share their experiences of recovery, to help break the stigma, myths, and misconceptions of sex addiction. This podcast may contain topics of sexuality, sexual trauma, dysfunction, or other things that may be triggering, so listener discretion is advised. Hello and welcome to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. My name is Jason, I'm a sex addict, and I will be your podcast host for today. What's going on, everyone? Welcome to episode 144 of the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. This week I'll be sharing an Experience, Strength, and Hope talk that we had at the noon Zoom room, and this will be featuring Gary O. We recorded this back in the end of September and finally have the chance to share it now. I wanted to mention up front that during the recording, Gary's internet froze up from time to time and skipped a few seconds, cutting out some of the audio. A few of us noticed this right at the beginning, and we thought about shutting off Gary's video to make the audio sound better. Sometimes that is a trick that you can do on Zoom to help preserve the audio, but we felt that it was important for the presentation at the meeting to have the full video. Most of the time when I've had audio go out like this, I've usually been able to do some editing to kind of piece it together. But unfortunately, when his video froze, a few words were truncated and I had no ability to make cohesive edits. Like many of us that have been on Zoom for the past few years, we kind of get used to these little problems. So throughout the recording, you'll have to kind of fill in the gaps mentally. During Gary's share, he did talk about the last few sentences from the basic text of the Green Book, Sex Addicts Anonymous. And this is from a section called The Steps Are the Spiritual Solution. This was written for the third edition of the book. I've had the first, second, and third editions. I remember a few years ago when I was at a meeting, someone read out of this section, and I was just struggling to find where the reading came from, noticing that it was not in the second edition that I had, but in the third edition. This was one of the sections that Gary's audio cut out just a few seconds of, and I thought this would be a good reading for the beginning of this episode. He focused on the last two sentences, but I'm going to read the last two paragraphs of this section. And this starts on page 99 of the Green Book and continues on to page 100. In our experience, though meetings are important, they are not sufficient for recovery from sex addiction. We need the spiritual solution offered by the 12 steps. To be sure, meetings are where most of us first encounter the steps, learn about the program, find our sponsors, and share with others our desire for recovery. But if we want to actually experience recovery in our lives, there are no shortcuts. We have to work the steps to experience the fruits of working the steps. The steps are the spiritual solution to our addiction, leading not only to a life of abstinence from our addictive sexual behaviors, but to a fulfilling life of service to our brothers and sisters in recovery and beyond. The spiritual awakening described in Step 12 puts us on the path of service and connects us with our higher power, our fellow addicts, and our world in ways we had never dreamed possible. This awakening is the foundation of a responsible and joyful existence as we seek and find our higher power's will for us, both in our individual lives and in the life of our fellowship. And for this priceless gift of recovery, so astonishingly simple, so freely available, we are humbly grateful. We invite all suffering sex addicts inside and outside the rooms of SAA to join with us in accepting this gift. Yeah, so it's those last two sentences that Gary shared. So at the noon Zoom room, we do have some rules in place for when we can do recordings. We will usually record the share, whether it's a first step or an Experience, Strength, and Hope, plus 3 additional shares before I shut off the recorder. So with all that being said, I am now ready to turn it over to Gary O at the noon Zoom room doing an Experience, Strength, and Hope share. Here it is. I hope you enjoy it. before Gary starts, I will be recording this for the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. Hi, everyone. I'm Jason, and Sex Addict. And we will record Gary's share and 3 comments afterwards, and then I will shut off the recorder. We're using audio only.
Okay, thank you, Jason, and thank you, Joel. I am Gary, and I am addicted to sex, pornography, and masturbation, but I am in recovery by use of the 12 steps. I want to say a couple of things at the outset. First, I asked for the opportunity to speak here, and I did so because a few months ago, one of the sort of spiritual outworkings of that was an increased sense of urgency on my part for carrying the message of recovery to those who are still suffering, both in and outside of the rooms of SAA. So one of the forms that takes is in speaking in meetings. The other thing I want to say at the outset is there are some parts of my story that, while I am careful to censor, I realize that by their nature, they could be triggering for some people. So if that's the individual, I encourage you to shut down my audio, if not more so. I want to start with a short passage from the Green Book, which is on page 100, and it's actually the last 2 sentences in the narrative portion of the Green Book before the personal stories start. And it means a lot to me, where it says, "And for this priceless gift of recovery, so astonishingly simple, so freely available, we are humbly grateful. We invite all suffering sex addicts inside and outside the rooms of SAA to join with us in accepting." So a little bit of background. I am 67 years old, and my sexual sobriety date is February 15th, 2022. So I'm just over 2 years, 7 months of sexual sobriety. My story kind of starts as a kid growing up in the 60s outside of New York City, in a family where both parents were active alcoholics. And my father could be pretty violent, and being around the house meant standing. And so the safest place away from the violence and the chaos was just to stay out of the house. And that's something I did sort of even without thinking about it. But I was befriended by a man in our neighborhood who made me feel important and cared about, and you can probably guess where this is heading. But he shared his alcohol with me, introduced me to drugs, and then explicit pornography at a time when that was not commonly available. And at 12 years old, I really under a woman's skirt, much less what an adult male looked like or how the parts fit together. I was pretty naive, but then things escalated from there to being introduced to sex. And this fellow sexually abused me for some time. At one point, my mother noticed some blood in my underwear, which was the result of the activity I had with this fellow, and took me to a doctor. For some reason, a doctor I'd never been to before left me alone with, and he molested me. And I never went back to the first fellow. I never went back to the doctor, but I made a decision at that moment that I would never trust anyone again. And that was a decision that colored my life in many ways going forward. But from age 12 on, I was an active drinker and drug user and compulsively masturbated multiple times every day. And pornography of any sort was not generally available, but when I could get a hold of it, it all in itself. So I managed to keep all those behaviors secret, or at least as far as I know, through my teens and into my adult life. I married and had kids, and all of my addictive behaviors continued. My drinking escalated to the point where I could no longer hold down a job. The house was in foreclosure, the cars were repossessed, and finally I was facing a felony drug count, and that was finally enough to convince me that I needed help, and I started AA, and as a result of the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, I have 25 years of sobriety from drugs and alcohol. But when I did my 4th step inventory with my sponsor, and it came to the part where you look at your sexual inventory, I could not be honest. I would not tell my sponsor what I had been up to and what had been going on. And at some level, I guess I thought that, this was none of God's business. I would give him everything above the waist, but below the waist was mine, and stay out of it. So in my sobriety from alcohol and substances, my sexual acting out and use of pornography and masturbation escalated. And in particular, when high-speed internet came along, that became a constant companion for hours every day, multiple times a day. I masturbated till I was sore. I got caught at work masturbating to pornography on a business computer. Didn't get fired, but kind of wish I had now. Multiple close calls, that any one of which could have put me in legal and or personal jeopardy. But I kept telling myself it must not be a problem because I keep dodging these bullets. So my use of internet pornography escalated to cams, escalated to hookup apps, and toward the end, I was hooking up for anonymous sex multiple times every week. And I will say that I was confused and disturbed by the fact that I was hooking up with men and didn't understand what that attraction was because I didn't identify as gay. And with a lot of therapy, I came to understand that I was acting out my trauma from childhood, and all of those instances were ones where I was the dominant partner, and that kind of fits into my comment about never trusting anyone again. I was never going to be a victim again, and that's how I acted out sexually. So things continued to progress, and my wife caught me using pornography. Caught me pants around my ankles, explicit porn on the computer, getting busy with myself. I was able to explain it away once, not so much the second time, but by the third time I was told to get help or get out. And so I chose to do what I knew how to do and turned to a 12-step program for sex and pornography addiction to work myself out of this problem. And what I want to communicate most about what happened and what things are like now is that, for teaching me how to abstain from alcohol, from drugs, from sex, from porn, it's a program that teaches me how to arrive at a spiritual awakening. And to me, that means being changed from the inside out. And so sex is only mentioned in the first step. The other 11 steps are about me. Likewise in AA, alcohol is only mentioned in the first step. The rest of it is about Gary and what Gary needs to do to change. And so that was the job ahead of me. And so my focus has not been on avoiding triggers and avoiding temptation, although those are things I do, but the focus is on attaining that spiritual awakening that both gives me a meaningful life and allows me to live as a sexually sober man. So steps 1 are where I recognize what a train wreck my life was becoming as a result of these addictive behaviors, and how no matter what I tried, I could not stop them. I couldn't set boundaries on them. I couldn't limit them. I could say, well, only once a week, or only on Thursday, or only with certain kind of people. But whatever barrier I set up, I broke down in no time, and was right back at hours spent either pursuing or getting deep into compulsive sex. So then the subsequent steps after those first 3 are, as I said, about changing myself, making an inventory of my character defects or shortcomings, looking at people I've hurt with my behavior, developing a conscious contact with God, and ultimately practicing those principles every day and carrying the message. So that brings me back around to where I am today. I have been fortunate in that my wife has stuck with me, and our relationship is still rocky a lot of the time. She's been betrayed by me for many years, many times, in many ways. And so we no longer have a physical relationship. And so my sobriety is complete celibacy, which is challenging. And yet, when urges come up, whether they are addictive ones or natural ones, I turn to my higher power that I call God to deal with them. And the urges are there, they're real, but I don't have to act on them. And that is the greatest gift of my recovery, that I have a choice. And in addiction, I was going to do whatever that urge told me to do, come hell or high water. I think the last thing I want to say is that for many people, the spiritual aspect of 12-step recovery is an obstacle for them, even though we talk about, higher power, and it could be anything. The word God pops up in the literature over and over again. And an experience that was an obstacle because I was angry at God. I could not understand how God could have let what happened to me as a kid happen. And how could I give my life and my will over to this God that seemed to turn his back on me? And I struggled with that for a long time, in my early substance sobriety, and I couldn't find any answers anywhere else. So finally, I just made a decision that I could either keep pursuing answers to that question, or I could pursue recovery, but I couldn't really do both. So I decided I need recovery more than I need the answers to those questions. And I have faith, I guess I would say that whatever God is like, we're going to sit down and have a talk. And I'm going to ask the questions and it's going to get explained to me. But until then, I'm just going to do what I need to every day to stay sexually sober, as well as sober in all other ways. And life just gets better every day as a result of that. One of the most surprising outcomes of step work is that I went back to school early in my recovery from alcoholism and became a nurse, and became a nurse working in an inpatient psychiatric unit at a VA hospital. And so I spend my days with men struggling with depression and anxiety and PTSD and addictions of various kinds. And none of that would have happened if I wasn't this addict who was passed out in a puddle of his own piss and vomit 25 years ago. And this talk today would not have happened if I wasn't a guy who just could not stop having sex in one form or another every day, multiple times a day. So I'm grateful and glad to be able to share it with you. And I think I'll end right there. Thank you.
Gary, thank you so very much for the incredibly honest and open and courageous share. For me personally, I resonated to so many levels of what you said. Just to mention one, it was so interesting that you highlighted that sex is only mentioned in step one, and the rest is about, in this case, was about you, but, would be about me or anyone else. Anyway, thank you very much. And the meeting is now open for affirmations. Please try to keep your comments to 1 minute. And Sean has already volunteered to be timer. So we will start. David P., followed by Sean.
Thank you so much, Joel. Hey, Gary, I am so grateful we had the talk this morning. I did not want to miss this talk. And I'm still traveling, but I made it today. Got to the hotel room. Your truth and your rigorous honesty means so much to me. Dr. Karn suggested that early childhood sexualization is a huge factor in the development of such addictions as we share. And we don't know why we did it. We don't know why we do it. I recognize so much of my early preteen years in your story. I never told anyone about my sort of situation until I was 65 years old. I kept that story as hidden as I could be. Mine happened to be with a priest. And that was the most shameful thing. I even thought, for the most part, it was even my own fault. I know that since I've come here, I've had love, support, encouragement, a wonderful sponsor who helped me. And I come here daily for medication. And buddy, that was the medication I need to hear. Love you, Gary. Proud of you.
Sean, followed by Sergio.
Thank you, Gary, so much for reaching out to us. And I forgot to start my own timer. Sorry about that. Oh, and thank you even more for telling a big portion of my story, and even more importantly, the bigger part of the solution. My story was very, very similar to yours. Also started with a priest when I was 5 years old and went on to a neighborhood guy who did the exact same thing with me. And I also, when got to the end of 10-year run in NA and left AA early because I wasn't an alcoholic and learned also the same thing in NA, I found this room. January 31st of 2023, I came here and I've been here almost every day since. And I really, really, really appreciate what you said on all levels, because I know I've got work to do, but now I've got instructions. So thank you so much again. And I love you, brother.
Sergio, followed by Dan L.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gary, for stepping up and sharing with us. I've only been in the rooms for a little over a year, but I followed many of your check-ins in the WhatsApp group. There's no time when I don't find something that I could use for that day. I myself also grew up with an alcoholic, and in this case was my dad. And I really, really appreciate your courage and your perspectives, the perspectives you share about the steps. I also think I can agree when you said that I have to be changed inside out for my disease to stop. So I'm really grateful to share this journey with you, man. I'm proud of you.
Many, many thanks to Gary for offering to have his Experience, Strength, and Hope share recorded for the podcast. It was an incredibly powerful share. He had a lot of really great information, and this is one of the many reasons why I wanted to share this recording, despite some of the audio difficulties that we were having during the meeting. I wanted to mention a few books after hearing Gary's share talking about replaying the victimization that he had as a child through acting out with men. There's a book called The Erotic Mind by Jack Morin, and there's a part of that book that goes into how current fantasies go back to earlier victimization. And there's also The Body Keeps the Score by Dr. Kolk, and I've mentioned that before on the podcast. I've heard a lot of talk about the erotic mind on the Mental Illness Happy Hour podcast that I listen to. People not understanding why they reenact the abuse that was done to them as part of their acting out. So I will leave links to those in the show notes. So thanks again, Gary. Whenever we do these types of recordings at the noon Zoom meeting, it's always up to the speaker to offer to be recorded. And recently we got an offer to record a first step at that meeting soon. Additionally, from another group, I got a first step recording that I'll be sharing on the podcast as well. So look forward to those episodes coming soon. And I've also finally started to schedule some new recordings for guests from our recent emails. And so for the rest of this episode, I had a few announcements to make and an email to read. I've been trying to get through recording the outro for this for a couple of days. This past weekend was extremely busy. Went out to a concert last night and back to recording finally. So with that theme of being busy, we've gotten a lot of emails through the Bay Area SAA website, and I've been trying to answer as many of those as possible. Like I mentioned, also responding to some of the emailers for the podcast, trying to schedule the new recordings. So with the announcements, the Bay Area Giving Thanks is coming up on November 2nd. For anyone here in the Bay Area, the announcement is on the website, and I was chosen to be the keynote speaker for that event. So I will probably be recording that, and depending on how it sounds, I may be sharing that on the podcast. And as I've been mentioning over the past few episodes, the Bay Area Giving Thanks is a fundraiser for the International Service Organization. We do this every November. And I do finally have the donation links. If anyone is interested in donating, you can always text BAGT to 91999, and that will take you to the link. And I believe this only works in the US. Our flyer has a QR code that will also take you to the link. And we're using fundraise.givesmart.com. The exact link for the Bay Area Giving Thanks for 2024. I will leave that link in the show notes if you don't have the flyer and want to make a donation. We usually try to raise between $15,000 and $20,000 each year, so any little bit helps. One of the other emails that I got recently, thinking of ISO, is from the Women's Outreach Committee, which is a committee from the ISO. And they are putting on a healthy dating workshop. 2 dates, Thursday, November 14th, 7:30 p.m. to 9 Central Time. And then Sunday, November 17th from 2 p.m. to 3:30. And again, that is Central Time. I do have the Zoom link, so if you're interested in that, please give me an email. And you can reach me at jason@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com, and I'd be happy to give that to you. For the show notes, I don't post direct Zoom links, so that's why I mentioned you can email me for the link. But yeah, for this event, panel members will share experience, strength, and hope and answer questions about dating in recovery. Sounds like a great topic. And another event that we have coming up is our quarterly SAA and COSA Speaker meeting. Usually it is on the first Sunday of the second month of the quarter, those being February, May, August, and November. But for November, they changed it to the second Sunday, and that will be Sunday, November 10th at 5:30 p.m. Pacific. I posted the information for that on the Bay Area SAA website if you're interested. I'm not sure if they pushed this because we're doing Giving Thanks the day before or if there was another reason, but look forward to that event coming up soon. So with those out of the way, I wanted to read an email that we just got a few days ago, and it says, "Hey, I just wanted to say thank you for the call out to the Reddit SAA community that you made in episode 140. I'm one of the moderators of that community, so it was cool to hear it mentioned." And again, that is reddit.com/r/SEXAA. for the SAA subreddit, and I'll leave a link to that in the show notes. I've been listening to your podcast for a few months after finding it while looking for examples of Step 1 shares. I've been in SAA fellowship for 4 years and only heard one first step presentation so far, and was looking for just hearing a few others before working on mine. Of course, my sponsor is helping out, but I've been really self-conscious about how to do it, so it was wonderful when I found you've been able to get some recorded. Thanks so much for your service. Signed, A. And I replied, "Thanks for all that you do with the SAA Reddit community." And I did post my handle to him on the email. I mostly add information about the podcast or to links to various sources for SAA information. So here's a list of first step presentations we've done for the podcast, and hopefully I didn't leave any out. I proceeded to list out episodes 26, 44, 69, 79, 107, 112, 117, 137, and I put a note that we have 2 more that are coming soon. So yeah, thank you for that email. While I'm thinking of emails, there was one that came in through the Bay Area SAA website that I wanted to touch on a little bit here. It was an interesting one that was specific about the podcast. There were a few other ones that I answered general information about the SAA program and what we do here in the Bay Area. And it says, "Hello, just started listening to the podcast and I'm realizing that I have a porn addiction and maybe even a sex addiction. My question I have is, how do I navigate a safe sexual connection with my wife while trying to stop my porn addiction? Do my wife and I have to change our sexual habits? I guess I need help navigating this new chapter in my life." And I responded, "Thanks for listening and writing in. Great questions, but difficult to answer specifically. I find that going to meetings and talking to other addicts about their experience helps me find guidance. Having a sponsor in the program and or a therapist can help out with safely navigating those questions. Many people new to the program will abstain from all sexual behavior for a certain amount of time to help clear away distorted thinking. Page 70 of the SAA Green Book has further information on defining healthier sexuality." And I provided a link to the basic text of the Green Book posted on saa-recovery.org. I continued, "My wife and I used to watch porn together, but when I entered the program, that had to change. Throughout my recovery, we were able to reintroduce things into our sex life in a healthier way with open communication between us. That works for some people, but not for others. There's no one single rule that guides us, but we can find help and advice from others going through the same struggle. If you need help finding links to literature or meetings or just need to talk, please let me know." And then I send off that email today. And so, yeah, that came in through the Bay Area website where we have a contact page there. But if you did want to leave feedback for the podcast, you can always reach us at feedback@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com. If you wanted to get a hold of me personally, if you want to be a future guest on the podcast or part of a panel, have any other questions about the program, you can reach me at jason@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com. So like I had mentioned on the past few episodes, for November and December, I will be releasing just a few episodes per month. These months tend to get pretty busy, and so look forward to about 2 or 3 episodes per month rather than usually about 4. And with that, I'm going to close out this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in, and as always, keep coming back. The views and opinions contained in the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Bay Area Intergroup or the ISO of SAA.